board sponsors many different agencies such as NAMI, Hopewell. They provide help for people in crisis, individuals with mental illnesses, persons with drug and alcohol addictions, women and children who are victims of domestic violence. This is a renewal levy. It's not new money, and it's very critical that this get passed. I'm going to leave some of these out on the table. Oh no, I'll pass them around. You know, everyone can just take 1, 2, 3, whatever you want. And mental disabilities also has a levy going. I'm not sure if that's a good idea that they're both at the same time or not. I also want to tell everybody about Walk the Walk. Walk the Walk is my favorite NAMI activity of the year. It will be October the 14th. 11 o'clock, we have a rally outside the courthouse. We have a few speeches. Jay Edwards, our representative at the State House, will be there to make a brief speech. And then we have a walk through town, down Richland Avenue, and then you can either walk along the bike path to the Appalachian Behavioral Healthcare Hospital for a free lunch, or you can walk up over the ridges. A lot of people go up over the ridges, and then they come down, and the lunch goes from about 11:30 till about 2 o'clock, because people trickle in depending on whether they went on a long walk or a short walk. You get free t-shirts, and it's very stirring seeing hundreds of people wearing our t-shirts, walking along, standing up for people with mental illness. So I'd urge anybody who's never been to give it a try. The 14th of October at 11 o'clock at the courthouse. Thank you.
Well, I'm Tom Walker, a member of the Board of Directors of the local chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And before I introduce our speaker, I want to make 3 announcements. First, 4 Athens public school districts are giving 0.15 CEUs, continuing education units, to its teachers who attend this lecture. Also, social workers, counselors, and nurses receive 1.5 CEUs. If you want either type of CEU, please sign the appropriate sign-up sheet on the display table, or for some school districts, sign the flyer, indicate the district, and give it to me to send to your continuing education person. Please note that social workers, counselors, and nurses should also fill out an evaluation form, and that's all over there. And you do that after the event, not before. I'm trusting that the person that did it before will be here at the end of it, at any rate. Now, let me talk, note that this talk and others in the series, that we have usually 5 or 6 in the series, are sponsored by NAMI principally, but there's also money that comes from the Athens Public Libraries, and Todd Bastine, who's not in the room at the moment, but you'll see him wandering around sometimes, has been very helpful, and we want to thank everyone concerned. Finally, for those of you who may not know, NAMI is an organization for and by persons having loved ones with mental illnesses. Our brochures are over there on the display table. Among other things, we take crisis calls. So let's say all of a sudden your son is exhibiting psychotic features, is sure that there are men from outer space that are coming down and spying on him, and this has never happened before. Come to our crisis meetings, which are the first and third Thursdays of the month, and there'll be a whole bunch of us in the room, and it's confidential, and we can give you advice and sort of guide you in the direction of trying to solve this problem. The problems like this come on, boom. You have a normal child who doesn't show any features or anything, and then all of a sudden, boom, the person is psychotic, or the person is deeply depressed and talking about suicide and that sort of stuff. We also have Family to Family, which is a course for and by family members who are trained in the latest information about mental illness, and it goes for something like 11 or 12 weeks, and it's in the spring and the fall. It's free, and it's really a godsend because for those who've been through it, you know that there's tremendous anxiety that comes with all of a sudden finding that you have a loved one that has a mental illness, a loved one that you had envisioned all these sorts of things for, but all of a sudden, boom, the loved one is hit with a mental illness. This course, NAMI, not NAMI, Family to Family, is very relieves the tension and gives you a lot of good information and gives you a basis for confronting or helping with the problem that your loved one has. Okay, now let me introduce tonight's speaker. Oh, wait a minute. First, well, you know, okay. God, I'm tired. I should relax. Okay. Let me introduce tonight's speaker. An OSU master's candidate in public health and a writer communication specialist at NAMI, Ohio, Rachel Geringer has experienced panic attacks since early in her undergraduate career. One of the anxiety disorders, panic disorder, is typified by recurrent uncontrollable panic attacks, which can cause those affected to shake, pass out, have symptoms similar to those of a heart attack, or in Ms. Geringer's case, even suffer from depersonalization and derealization. That's feeling out of body. In addition to defining and discussing her experiences with panic disorder, Ms. Geringer will tell us how she combats and lives with her disorder. So, Ms. Geringer. Rachel talked for about 40 minutes or some 30 minutes, however is comfortable. This is, and there'll be a lot of questions, I assume, from the group. We'll have questions in a little bit.
Hi guys. So I'm really a little bit nervous speaking in front of people, and I'm hoping I don't have a panic attack while I'm up here. But I, want to speak about what I've been through and what I continue to go through because
we won't get it confused with a heart attack.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I want people to know what this disorder is like because I don't think people really talk about this, especially compared to other mental illnesses and, depression and anxiety. So he did a great job of introducing myself. Like he said, I work at NAMI, Ohio, the state office, and I also work on the adult care facility project there, so group homes for people living with serious mental illness, and that's what I like to do. And I have been diagnosed with panic disorder and depression, and I'll talk mostly tonight about the panic disorder, but then I'll talk a little bit about how the two kind of are each other's worst enemy. So first I'm going to ask some questions. How many of you have ever felt your heart pounding in your chest? What about sweaty palms, nausea, trembling, any of those? How many of you would say that you have ever had a panic attack? What about feeling, outside your body while you're having one? Okay. So yeah, those are just some, I'm not going to talk a lot about, the symptoms and I'm not an expert on panic disorder. I'm not a psychiatrist. I just know what I have been through and what has helped me in my experience. So some of this, I actually was sitting this morning on my couch with my dogs, drinking my coffee and thinking about this illness and what I've learned from it and how it's changed my life. So I wrote some stuff down. And first I'm going to go back to the beginning when this all developed. It was my sophomore year of college, and I was at my boyfriend at the time's apartment, and we were just hanging out one night. And I can't even remember how it happened, but how panic attacks happen, it's just this overwhelming feeling of panic and dread and fear over really nothing in my case. And actually, I ended up passing out and falling headfirst into a wall. And I joke that panic disorder literally smacked me in the face. And after that night, I remember laying on the bed, and I was begging my boyfriend at the time, take me to the hospital, I'm having a heart attack. You know, it was about 4 years ago, so I was about 22, you know, and I thought that I was having a heart attack. I could feel my heart pounding through my chest, and I thought that there was no way it could keep pounding like that, and eventually it was going to stop working, and I would die. And I remember laying in the bed, feeling like I was stuck in my body and I couldn't get out. So he didn't take me to the hospital, which is probably a good thing because that wouldn't have really been helpful. So some people have one panic attack, some people have isolated incidents where they have them. For me, after that one, it kept happening. I call it like the start of my nightmare, because they kept happening more frequently over time after that first one. And I never, after that one, had one where I passed out and fell into a wall again, thankfully. But after that first one, unfortunately, my life changed forever. And so that happened my sophomore year of undergrad. And that year and my junior year were probably two of the most difficult years of my life. And, you know, college is supposed to be what everyone says the best time of your life. But for me, it was kind of clouded with these horrible panic-filled nights. And for me, my panic attacks always happen at night because, you know, you're laying there, you're supposed to be falling asleep, and then your thoughts kind of start racing, and soon I would be tossing and turning and sweating and shaking, and sometimes I would be so nauseous from the panic that I would vomit. And there were times where that would happen every night for an entire week. And I didn't know what was happening to me, and that was just, you know, really scary to not know if it's, because it feels very physical and you're thinking, what's wrong with my body? Am I sick? But every doctor I talked to said that I was physically fine and they couldn't explain why I wasn't feeling well.
They didn't know what a panic attack was?
Well, I would go in saying I've just been feeling really nauseous, or, you know, I was shaking or sweating, and they'd say, well, you don't have the flu, or you don't, you know, there wasn't really any reason. And next I'm going to talk about two of the scariest symptoms that I don't really talk about a lot because it's kind of, you know, you feel like you're the crazy person. And I was kind of afraid of how I would be perceived if I talk about it. It's not really talked about in terms of panic attacks. A lot of people talk about the physical symptoms like I was talking about. It feels like you're having a heart attack. But as he mentioned, I have depersonalization and derealization, two fancy words. So I'm going to describe both of them. Derealization is feeling like you are detached from your surroundings. So when I experience this during panic attacks, everything around me feels unfamiliar. So I could be in my bed, you know, laying next to my cat, and you know, they just seem completely foreign to me. It's almost like, you know, I'm an alien who was beamed down into this strange world. And, you know, I'll look at, even, you know, sometimes now I'll look at, you know, my partner next to me in bed, and it's kind of like you get this feeling like he's unfamiliar to you. And to me in those moments, it's kind of interesting, the only people who felt familiar to me and who I kind of gravitated to were my parents, and I'm not, you know, super close to them, so that's interesting. But so that's derealization. Depersonalization is kind of a different sensation, but, you know, for me they usually happen at the same time. So depersonalization is that out-of-body experience. You feel detached from yourself. It's like you're looking down on yourself almost, and it's, you know, tough to remember going through both, it's tough to kind of remember what to hold on to and, you know, who you are during these really scary experiences. And both of these sensations for people with panic attacks, this has been, you know, documented in people with panic attacks, and it really fuels this feeling of like you're losing control over your life and you feel like you're going crazy. And that, you know, as I'll talk about a little bit, kind of makes the panic attacks even worse. And for me, they're the most scary because they're coming from my brain instead of my body, and everything else, you know, is happening outside of me, but these are the things that no one can see. And so I learned later that these two symptoms are really the body's way of dealing with trauma, and it's your mind taking your body away from what is happening to protect you. And it's kind of beautiful to think of that way, I think, but still really terrifying when you're going through it. And so the only way that I've really found to deal with that is to hold on to the familiar. And, you know, I have to repeat to myself really simple phrases that sound probably a little bit silly right now, but I would say, you know, this is my bed, this is my cat, these are the sheets on my bed, kind of like grounding exercises to kind of come back to reality. So some people have very specific triggers for their panic attacks, and I don't really have those. Sometimes, you know, like I said about my first one, it feels like it came out of nowhere. But some people, you know, if they go into a large crowd of people, they'll have a panic attack, or if they are in a small space, you know, claustrophobia, people will have a panic attack. It kind of depends on the person. For me, you know, like I said, they're less defined. Talking about panic attacks like I'm doing right now can sometimes spur them. Change for me, just like big life changes that are scary in general, stuff like that. Lately, I feel like stress has been stress usually compounds the panic attacks. Traveling to new places can cause panic attacks in me because, again, like I said, I need to hold on to that familiar when I'm feeling panicky, and it can be hard to do that when you're in a new place. So, I mean, there are certain triggers that, you know, kind of spark the panic attacks, but for me, you know, there are still things that I'm learning that might trigger a panic attack, but I've learned to kind of over time prepare myself mentally for the unknown and go into things knowing that it might kind of spark a panic attack. And so there are also certain things that I used to like that I kind of started to avoid after I developed panic disorder. I used to love scary movies and roller coasters. But then after I developed panic disorder, I couldn't do these things because, like, anything that got my heart rate going would kind of send me into a panic. And, you know, anything scary, I've kind of gotten back to where I can watch scary movies and do stuff like that, but I still, you know, have those times where I think my heart's pounding, and then, you know, it can happen very quickly. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, the worst enemy of my panic attacks, and this is, you know, like fairly common in other people, is thinking about how you are panicking in the moment. And that kind of makes you panic even more. It fuels the fire, like, oh God, this is happening, and then it kind of compounds. And so it's really difficult to think about how you're not panicking while it's happening, but you have to fight off those thoughts, and I, you know, try to do that the best I can. And panic attacks, when you're going through it, just the physical symptoms and, like I said, the mental symptoms, they're really scary, and so your initial response to something scary is to be afraid of it, but it's happening inside of you. And so it wasn't until I told myself that these panic attacks weren't going to kill me and that I was going to be okay, and I repeated that over and over to myself, and I really started to believe it, that I knew I was going to be okay, and I had to learn to practice that and to constantly remind myself, you're going to get through this, you're going to get through this. So for me, the number one most important treatment I have found for my panic disorder is medication. And I'm not saying that everyone who has experienced a panic attack needs to take meds, but I'm just saying that it is the single most important thing that has worked for me. Every day I take an antidepressant, and I like to describe this as when you have panic disorder or even depression, you're kind of, this is normal, this is where you're at without meds, and I kind of like to describe the medication as bringing me up to, you know, almost normal, where I can reach the top. And so I have gone through therapy and learned different coping skills for dealing with panic attacks. And having the meds kind of brings me to that level where I can use those. You know, if I'm so, you know, down here, I can't even get up to normal. So that's how I describe that. And there have been a couple of times where I thought, oh, I'm good now and I can go off my meds, which is pretty common with people with mental illness who need to be on medications, and then, you know, the panic attacks would start happening again, and my life just became completely dysfunctional because I would stay up all night, and I'll talk in a minute about how the depression factors in. And so it was really tough for me to accept that I had to take medication because, you know, no one wants to be on a medication, and especially, you know, telling people that you are on a psychiatric medication. There's, as you guys probably know, this huge stigma, and, you know, there's stigma from other people, but then there's also stigma within yourself of kind of accepting that I have to be on this medication, and that's okay. Another thing that I learned that really helped me is how to breathe. And it seems like the most simple thing. Like, everyone breathes, we know how to do it, we do it without thinking about it. But it's something so basic, and it is really my first line of defense when I'm feeling panicky. And so when I'm feeling panicky, I make my mind focus on my breath, and I really, you know, take the deepest breaths that I can and exhale as slowly as I can. And I kind of like to think when I'm in this moment of breathing in as much air as I can get in, and like the air is almost my medicine making me better, and I think about that while I'm breathing. And so I actually learned how to breathe in therapy. It's kind of interesting. Another tool that I have in my arsenal, as I call it, when I feel panicky is horseback riding. I have a horse. And for me, that has been incredibly therapeutic. Actually, even to this day, when I feel panicky, I usually am like, okay, I have to go ride my horse. And then I'm good after that. That's, you know, just a huge therapy for me, because when you're riding a horse and you're, you know, super dedicated to it, you can't think about what's, you know, going on in your head. You're only thinking about the horse, and you're thinking about what you're doing. So I like to think of every panic attack that I have, and kind of think of it as a journey back to normalcy, and a fight to get back to myself. That's, you know, I have to set it up in my head as, you know, you have to get back to who you are, because when you experience things like derealization and depersonalization, you kind of feel like a completely different person, and you're like, who is this person? I don't recognize this, and will I ever be myself again? Who was I? And I guess I should talk about this now. After I have panic attacks, I fall into depression. Because I think my body just gets so exhausted and my mind gets so exhausted that then the next day I just, you know, feel incredibly depressed, and that has gone on after panic attacks for weeks. So that's kind of how the two like to play together. And so I was actually diagnosed with depression before panic disorder. The panic disorder developed after the depression, but then they kind of work together. And so after I have panic disorders or panic attacks at night, then in the morning, you know, I feel really depressed. I can't eat. There have been times where I can't eat for days, or, you know, I can't sleep. And after a night of panic attacks, I kind of feel unrecognizable. Like I was saying, I have to kind of remember who I am. I remember distinctly after a night of having panic attacks the next morning, looking out my window and seeing the students, because I was in college and I was in, you know, a college apartment, seeing the students walk to class. And I remember thinking, how are they laughing? And how are they, you know, walking to class and doing these normal things? It just seemed so completely out of my reach. And that's where the depression comes in. And so, like I said, a panic attack is kind of a fight to get back to myself. At the start of every panic attack, I think to myself, just get back to who you are. And I used to be afraid that I would never be myself again, and that I would kind of get stuck in my mind. And I don't know, that's probably just the fear that comes with panic disorder. And so I guess I'm going to finish up. I don't know how long I've been talking.
Well, that's all right.
Okay.
We'll ask questions.
Yeah. And so I want to end with this thought. Mental illness in some ways is just like any other chronic illness. It doesn't go away. You just learn to manage it. And it takes hard work, and you have to be prepared to fail sometimes. I take a pill every day to help manage my chronic condition. I have another pill that I can take when the symptoms become too difficult to handle without it. And I'm not ashamed of this. I'm proud of what my mind and what my body have been through, and I'm proud of the battles I've won. I'm forever grateful that after each panic attack, I made it out on the other side, and that even when that other side felt incredibly dark, I slowly started to remember who I am, and I got there eventually.
At one point you said that the panic attack is one way that your mind deals with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have trauma?
No, I mean, maybe not trauma is the right word.
Stress?
Just, what your body is going through in that moment. It's like, it's almost like you're being chased by a lion, but there's no lion. There's nothing that you're being chased by, and your body is reacting as if you are going through trauma. And so, that's its way of coping is, I'm going to take you out of this.
Pull out of it, yeah.
And not everyone with panic attacks has those symptoms. A lot of people just have the physical. But I actually wrote, how many of you have heard of the Mighty? It's a website. They talk about, physical disabilities and mental disabilities. I actually wrote a post on that about depersonalization and derealization and these two symptoms. And it got like over 40,000 shares on this website, and like over so many comments, and just reading, like I still get new comments to this day on it, and people are saying, I have been going through this for years and years and years, and I had no idea what it was called, and you described exactly what I'm going through. And just to, writing is my main thing. I'm not so good at speaking as I am writing, but I love, connecting with people and helping people realize that other people are going through what they're going through. So that's been really awesome.
Okay, let's have some questions.
I'm an open book, so.
You never had any episodes prior to college?
Mm-mm.
And so as a child, as a teenager, it never came up? Depression never came up?
Oh, yeah. I was diagnosed with depression in, I think, middle school or high school. I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time. So I was on an antidepressant previously in high school, and then I, just felt like I didn't really need it anymore. And I will say that the depression that I experienced once I developed panic disorder was nothing like what I had experienced before. It was 10 times more intense. There were times where the most difficult part of it was the days after the panic attacks, because the panic attacks, it's not, I learned that it wouldn't kill me. I learned that it wouldn't hurt me and that I would get through with it. But then, like I said, the depression that I feel after is just, the most crippling thing. And there were points where I thought that I had to take a semester off of college, and because, the next couple days I couldn't eat, and,
Did you go back on the same medication that you were on previously?
I did. And then I eventually switched, and I'm really good on the one I'm on now.
Is it an SSRI?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind saying which one it was?
Lexapro is what I'm on now. Mm-hmm.
When you finally did seek out professional help, where did your counselor start with you?
Let me try to think back. I feel like that was so long ago, but I guess it's only 4 years-ish ago. I was really lucky to have the services that I had in college. I'm just going to start by saying that, because I was able to see a counselor a couple days a week, and then I was able to see a psychiatrist, and I saw both at the same time. Like I said, we really, worked on the breathing exercises a lot, and tried to kind of identify if there were any triggers, really. But there were, times that I just went to her and I was in complete crisis mode. Like I said, there were a couple times where I thought that I was going to have to drop out of college because it was just so bad. But yeah, breathing was really what we worked on a lot. Different coping exercises.
When you passed out, the first time, did it occur more than once that you passed out?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why you passed out?
I think my heart was just pounding, and I think I wasn't breathing. I mean, there have been times where I've had panic attacks where I feel like I'm going to pass out, but I think after it happened once, I was kind of like, whoa, that can happen. And then
When you had those breathing issues, did you ever have carpal tunnel where you couldn't straighten up your hands?
No.
Or any muscle? Okay. Because it tends to happen with hyperventilation.
Oh, really?
You change your pH, you're blowing up when you control your breathing.
Uh-huh.
If you're panting, you're blowing off too much CO2. You change your pH. That changes all kinds of things. You can go into tetany because calcium gets changed, and that's what causes the passing out. Hyperventilation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know why it happened that one time, and it didn't happen after that. I just remember falling into a wall and then laying down in a bed and trying to calm down.
Is not there usually fear underneath the basis of the panic?
What did you say?
Fear?
Is that the basis? Yeah, I don't even know if fear is the best way to describe it. It's really hard to describe unless you've actually experienced it. It is kind of, you're afraid of something, but there really isn't anything there to be afraid of, I could just be laying in my bed, and then it's not really like there's any certain trigger. It's just kind of this overwhelming feeling like there's this, I don't want to say a cloud because that sounds more like depression, but it just hits you, and I don't know, it's really hard to describe.
So panic is so common, which I think this room full of people attests to, but I've always thought of panic attacks as related to stress, but in listening to you, I wonder how much of it is part of some kind of brain disorder rather than, that's triggered by stress, but I wonder if it is something with the brain.
Yeah, I mean,
Does your family have any of it?
mm-mm.
No?
Like I said, some people have panic attacks. They kind of, they might have one in their entire life. They might have, a couple. But for some reason, I don't know why, but it was almost like a switch flipped. And after that first one, it just kind of spurred other ones. And, talking to therapists and psychiatrists, they're like, yeah, that's what happens with panic disorder. I don't know why it happens. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I mean, it's just a thought, really.
Yeah. Any other questions?
A comment that I'd like to make, I'm an ear physician.
Uh-huh.
And I see panic attacks a lot.
Yeah,
'cause
I would
that's where they
imagine.
end up. Not that I'm an expert in that area, but what I've seen is that it's usually a cyclical thing, meaning you feel something that actually is somatic, you actually feel, whether it's chest pain, stress, something that makes you think physically there's something wrong. Is it something bad? And then your breathing changes. And as you blow off CO2 and you hyperventilate, you start to feel more symptoms. You actually are feeling something.
Yeah.
And it gets worse and worse the more, and then you start into a feedback loop that eventually ends in that kind of picture where you actually pass out or something. But it's kind of self-induced because you get yourself so worked up. And usually if you can just understand exactly what you're doing, one, control your breathing, and so that it doesn't get any worse, and two, that it's not something physical necessarily once you know that it's something that you're kind of believing that the lion's there even though the lion's not really there. You're just terrified, and you're getting into that feeling, and it can happen to anyone. It can happen if you're susceptible, and you can get into that kind of a picture.
Yeah, I will say that, like I said, the breathing is so important, and that has been, really helpful for me learning.
That's because you slow your breathing down.
Yeah, and you really focus, because we don't really, think about our breath, and we just kind of breathe, and it's what our bodies do, but, you don't notice, like when I had that first panic attack, I didn't notice that I wasn't breathing. So you really have to tell yourself, okay, breathe, But then it's also, too, about controlling those, and this is where the therapy comes in, controlling those thoughts that you have, because you kind of have these running thoughts running through your head that are spurring the panic attacks, and for me, they don't even always have, I don't know, they don't always have really meaning. Like sometimes, I'm going to try to describe this the best I can. Sometimes mine feels kind of like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and I'm thinking about all of these, news stories that we hear on the news and everything horrible going on in the world. And for some reason, in that moment, it just feels like it's all on me, and that's kind of what I'm focusing on. And I don't know, it's like something switches in my brain that goes from my thinking normal to this really, I don't want to say disordered thinking, but it's just, for some reason I'm fixated on certain really negative things. And it's not necessarily like something going on in my life that had, spurred that. Sometimes stress can kind of make it worse, but for me it's not necessarily always that there's some sort of trigger that I can identify.
Do you watch the news less, or to try to avoid this sort of stuff?
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I watched more television, though, not the news, but like TV shows when I was having panic attacks, because that really was another thing that helped kind of ground me. I feel like this sounds weird, but I would look, watch the TV shows, and I would be like, oh, look at these people doing normal things, and they're not, stuck in their head, overthinking everything, and look, they're smiling, and for some reason that really helped. Watching that in my dorm room was something that I did a lot at random hours of the night, so it wasn't always good shows, but.
Do you know why they would happen at night rather than day?
I think because during the day I could distract myself. I mean, this is a fairly common thing too. You're laying there at night and you had kind of a busy, stressful day, and you can't really stop your thoughts, and you might kind of lay there trying to fall asleep for a while. That happens to people, but for me, that would kind of, oh, I can't sleep. If I can't sleep right away, then, I would keep thinking more and more. And then, so I think it's just the fact that you have nothing to do. You're laying there trying to go to sleep. And when I was younger, I used to have a lot of anxiety about sleep in general, so that might somehow be attached to it. I don't know.
Does your boyfriend help you with this? Or have boyfriends helped you with this?
Not really. I mean, it's a really difficult thing for someone who hasn't gone through it to, do something about it, because, people have told me before, if I'm feeling panicky, oh, just calm down, just stop thinking. It's like, that really doesn't work. So, I mean, he'll say, I'm here for you if you need me, and really that's helpful to me. But it's kind of a matter of myself fighting to kind of get out of my brain.
Do you feel like there have been people in your life who maybe have been judgmental or don't seem to really understand that experience? And if so, how did you respond? How do you navigate those situations?
I've had a couple people say, that I shouldn't talk about what I've gone through. And I mean, this is kind of not even just panic disorder. This is people saying you shouldn't talk about mental illness if you're experiencing it, that, you won't get a job, or you won't, people will judge you and think differently of you. And I kind of thought of it as when I went through those really horrible times of depression after I had panic disorder, I was thinking to myself that something has to come out of this, something, I have to do something with what I've experienced. And I've gotten really involved in NAMI and talking about what I've gone through. I still have people, family members mostly, who say that, I shouldn't talk about it, and I try not to let them get to me.
Are they worried about how it'll reflect on them?
I don't think so.
No.
I think they're just worried about my future. And like I said, when I was feeling really bad, I wasn't thinking about, how this will affect my future chances of getting a job or whatever. I was thinking about, how can I do something with this, and how can I make something positive out of this, because that's what you kind of have to do when you've gone through something. You want to turn around and help other people, and you want to raise awareness. And
I have a radio program, and I interview a lot of people with mental illnesses and so on, and of course I'm part of NAMI. And I found that doing things for other people, maybe explaining your particular disorder and speaking out and so on, gives a sort of release. People I've talked to feel actually part of their therapy is to articulate what their particular disorder is like, and try to help people with the same disorder, and or other people to have less stigma. And so it sounds to me as if you get a certain release by talking about your disorder.
yeah, I'm so involved in the mental health world. I started by taking a family-to-family class, because I have a family member with mental illness, and that's how I got involved with NAMI, and then I was completely hooked, and now I work at the state office. And I've really kind of dove into trying to help other people who, are really in the throes of their illness. And not just people with panic disorder. Like I said, I'm really lucky to have the treatment that I had, and I think about that all the time when I, talk to people on the helpline who can't get treatment. They can't see a psychiatrist. They can't get these things that I was so lucky to have, because I don't know where I would be today if I didn't, see a psychiatrist, or, didn't see that therapist a couple times a week. And so just helping people get the same care that I was really lucky to get is one of my missions.
The services you were getting were through OSU?
I went to a small
OSU
school.
is wonderful in that sense.
Yeah. I went to a small school in rural Indiana, and they had a small counseling center there, and they had one psychiatrist and a handful of therapists. But yeah, I was able to go a couple times a week and meet with the psychiatrist, and they were really great.
Any more questions?
Do you feel that having had depression when you were younger was the panic disorder a metamorphosis due to the depression?
It's a really deep question. I don't think I know the answer to that. I don't know. I mean, maybe the fact that I had one mental illness, then, hey, what's another? I don't know. Just add them on. I really don't know. Like I said, I was doing really well mental health-wise before I had that first panic attack. I had, stopped taking my antidepressant, and I kind of felt like I almost, and I don't know if this is a real thing or a good thing to say, that I kind of grew out of my depression in my teenage years, and then the panic disorder came on, and then the depression kind of came back with a vengeance. And like I said, it was completely unlike what I had experienced before. It was 10 times worse. And
Yeah, because I have experienced in my later years, in my later adult years, after menopause, it's very striking. Severe panic, like what you're explaining, and I would conk out completely, and I would never know when it would happen. It just would happen, and I got exceedingly ill after that. And after I was sent out from the hospital, because you're fine, you're on all the meds,
yeah,
you're grand, off you go, and I have never experienced a 24-hour panic until that time.
wow,
And I walked around for approximately till I had ECT done. I walked around approximately 4 months with constant panic attacks, where I would be conking out, I would be sweating profusely, shaking, having tremors, not being able to stay in myself, and like what you're saying, you're trying to make contact with people, but nobody's listening because you're not making sense either. But you're not able to take in what they're saying.
yeah,
And you're also holding on to them so that you don't fall or crash. You know what I'm saying? And it's so debilitating, and it's a lesson to the soul to know that you can be at the depths and you can rise above it. I just was very fortunate. I had to pay a lot of money, a lot of thousands of pounds, well, Irish money, punts. Well, they're called euros now, to have ECT. And once I had my brain sent into a convulsion and set the neurotransmitters back functioning, I was able to not take buspirone, which is a medication that they give you for panic, and it's absolutely useless. It's FDA approved, but it does absolutely nothing. It's just like taking a sugar pill. But once I got my brain rewired, I was able to function. And I didn't feel this dreadful dread and this amazing, overwhelming feeling that you're not going to stop moving.
Yeah.
And your breath goes.
And you're like, how is my heart still beating?
Yes.
Like it had to run out a while ago.
I would have night sweats. I mean, it was just so deep.
And I think that's not,
humiliating.
people when they talk about panic attacks, they think you know, you have one and then you maybe a couple months later have another one, and there's no talk about, like you said, 24-hour, like in my case it would be all night, and then kind of in the morning I could distract myself a little bit, and you know, I never really felt normal in the morning, but no one thinks that that can happen
It does.
unless you've experienced it.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess if people have, look like you have.
I just wanted to, how many ECT treatments did you?
Did I get?
Yes,
15.
15.
How many?
15.
15, and it really worked well for you, huh?
It eventually did, yes.
Yeah, ECT has a bad reputation, but it really works well in a lot of cases.
Yes. Well, they have changed the processing of how they actually administer and set the electrode, you know, to send the brain into a convulsion. So it's much more finite now than it ever was. But the only side effect is memory loss.
Yeah.
And does that go away, the memory loss?
No,
You still have chunks of your memory that are
Yes.
gone?
yes. But I had to get rid of the panic.
Yeah.
The panic was just debilitating. But it's like every mental illness, even though it's not something you can see, but it's something you feel, is a force to be reckoned with. And it's a learning onto your soul, because it hits the depths of your person and your mind. And so you have this ability, after you come out, to have this tremendous empathy and willingness to help others who suffer from mental illness.
Yeah.
And I kudos to you.
And you.
It's just amazing.
Well, if people want to come up and ask questions, converse some more, we do.
Don't know and talk about such personal experience. So
Thank
you for
you.
that.
Thank you for saying
Everything else was luckily promised, plus travel, minus 35, that should be 30. If it isn't, tell me.
I'm going to take more.
Very good.
Thank you.